So in addition to the benefit of leveraging Agile's database and our data for these custom match audiences, there's an added benefit of partnering with Agile when it comes to your campaign implementation and optimization. There's a strategic partnership that we implement with all of our clients, and that comes from our account management team as well as our data compilation team in partnership with your digital team members. And when we talk about how all of that integrates together, it really comes down to understanding the education market. We work cross-functionally with different teams in our organization. And what comes from that is we have an in-depth understanding of the education market. There are different times of year that are best for reaching educators at different parts of that cycle and at different levels of education, meaning pre-K to 12 or K to 12 markets is different than a higher education or even a public library market. And our data compilation team is really great at compiling all of the information on the trends that we're seeing in data flow. And from that, we're able to use that information to inform strategy for digital campaigns. So when we look at when schools go back in the fall, not every school starts in September. Not every district starts in August. Some schools go year round. So if we're talking with our clients about doing a back to school campaign, yes, we're going to build the audiences like we've talked about. We're going to look at which schools that we want to reach. But then there's an added layer that comes from that of once we have this overarching list, we're going to look at which schools start in August, which schools start in September. We will start campaigns with schools starting back in August before we would start the campaigns focusing on educators whose schools start back in September. So there's a very intentional strategic partnership that we go through with our clients. When we talk about budget season and when schools are planning for budgets and then when they're actually buying, we look at that January to March period for consideration. And then we look at April through May for actual purchasing, also a bit in the fall. So it really depends on what your product is, the intention behind it. We also have the same thing with professional development windows. So if we talk about professional development, oftentimes there's a spike in professional development actually occurring in late summer because educators are starting to go back for the year. So thinking about when are they actually planning these professional development opportunities for July? Okay, so if that's part of their budgeting planning, we need to think about spring for the year, that school year that's going to start in the fall. When we talk about budget season, are we just trying to reach decision makers? Oftentimes when we talk about budgeting with our clients, yes, the higher level positions in administration are the ones who ultimately sign off on purchasing decisions. However, there's real validity in trying to reach classroom level educators, department heads, even principals or assistant principals, in being those grassroots influencers. So when we think about that, what we actually see from our campaigns and from working with our clients is administrators are great to try to start reaching by email or professional digital platforms or search campaigns in January once they're back in the classroom. However, we see a large spike of lower titles, meaning classroom or building titles, being most active on digital platforms in the break of December when everyone's out for the holidays. So oftentimes we'll work with clients and identify their audiences, whether it's building level positions or more district level positions, and isolating those audiences and then developing campaigns around that. So we may start a brand awareness campaign in December, those first or those last 2 weeks when they're out for the holidays, and then really do a bigger push into January. But that way you're starting to have 2 or 3 weeks of brand awareness campaigns before you do a bigger push into the buying cycle with more administrative titles being added in. So there's an intention that comes with all of our client campaigns, and it's really dependent on the client. It's really dependent on the time of the year and ultimately the client's goal. So there is not a one size fits all approach for any of our clients. We're just very intentional in looking at your initiatives, your goals, and ultimately the adoption of whatever your product or service is for schools or libraries.